I am so excited to welcome Abbey Marino-Briggs, also known as the Bold Professional. She's a career coach, professor. She just received her MBA. She's a brilliant mind, and I'm so excited to have her here today. Abby, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for that intro. I love the way that you uplift your friends and your network and your people always, and I'm so happy to be here with you today.
It's so exciting. So Abby and I go back just a little bit. From we worked in the well, you worked we were in the same co-working space, and
Yes.
there's been a lot of brilliant people that I've met through that co-working space, one of them being Abby, and it's so fun to watch her on this journey as she launched Bold Professional and has had so much success. I'd love for you to give us just a little bit about you, and then I have some questions that I'm so anxious to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, Amy, I am an adjunct professor, a career coach, recently graduated with my MBA, and I founded the Bold Professional about a year ago to provide content, coaching, and courses to really help people, I say, unlock their inner boldness in their careers. So, helping people design the job that they actually want and then learn the tactics that it takes to go and get hired for it. So, my own background, I have had a variety of experience serving as a program manager, internship coordinators. I've been on hiring teams, and I've interviewed about 1,000 people for a variety of jobs, programs, internships, etc. And really, in my experience, I saw that people, job seekers, were making just the same mistakes over and over again. Incredible people, qualified people, just doing some of the tactics wrong that cost them time, money, and amazing opportunities. And I just really wanted to start talking about it, sharing about it. I just love seeing people optimize their talent and land in careers that they love. And so I kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm going to do something about this. But at a similar point, I also experienced my own transition where I had an amazing career, but there was something about it that just was no longer working for me. And so I was trying to coach myself through that. I had like a 13-month stint that I like to call career purgatory. And I was looking for someone to help me through that. And so I went through some curriculum, I talked to a variety of mentors, and I was really looking for the coach that I wanted and I couldn't find at the time. So after I coached myself through that season, I decided I was going to become the coach that would help other people who were going through similar things. So all of that led me to launch the Bold Professional. It's been about a year. It's been really organic, really exciting. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to talking to you about everything that I've done and learned and can help people with from that experience.
Well, it's really cool to see that you found this lack, this void, and you were like, "Wait, I love this. I'm passionate about helping people, helping them win, right? Essentially.
Yep.
And so I'm passionate about this. I couldn't find what I really needed, so let me create it." And it's such a bold, once again, bold move because it's so hard to get started. And so
hmm
I like applaud you for seeing that void and filling it. And I think that one reason you've seen this explosive growth is probably your message resonates with people. So what about
Yeah.
your message do you find that resonates the most with people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two sides to it. I think of what I do as two-sided. It's the career design side. So figure out what you actually want to do with your life, and then the get hired for it side. So now I know what I want to do, but now I need to convince someone that I'm the right fit for it. And I think on the design your career side, there's again, not a lot of people talking about it. There's not a lot of education to figuring out what you want to do with your life. People are expected to just sort of pick a college major and go from there. And I also think something that I experienced in my own life is as my seasons changed, as I grew up, got married, had my own home, what I wanted from career changed too. And that's so common. But again, I couldn't find anyone talking about this. So I think people go through this moment where they're like, why do I suddenly not like my job anymore? I liked it 2 months ago. And most of the time when people ask me that question, I'm like, well, what has changed in your life in that period of time? And most of the time, there's a major life transition that aligns with a lack of satisfaction in career. And so I think just being able to tell people it's normal, it's okay, right? Like you're not alone is very resonant. So that's sort of
Absolutely.
piece one to the question. On the other side, in the last 5 years, we've seen so much change in the job search with the rise of AI, with the COVID pandemic, with a change in, the president has changed the economic situation. There's just a lot of uncertainty. It is actually harder to get a job right now than it was 5 years ago. And people don't know how to navigate the landscape that it is today. So it's very frustrating. You hear stories of people getting laid off, being without a job for upwards of a year. And there's a lot of advice out there, but people just need help in this area. So being able to have real world strategies that actually work can help people get a job, I think is resonating in this time when people are really struggling with the job market.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we sort of found this synergy in working together and why we're here today, besides Abby's amazing, is that, utilizing your network. And that's something we talk about. That's something you talk about is such a key piece of the how to, right?
Totally.
Everyone's applying online, and
Yep.
there's a whole thing conversation we can have about that and the bots that are coming through, the resumes coming in. But there's something to be said about that in-person thing that is a big differentiator. So do you have any stories you want to share with us about sort of people who've seen success by maybe shifting the way they're applying and shifting the way they're going about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about how I think in order to get a job in this market, you have to have a network. You have to know how to use the network. And so that's why I love what you're doing, Amy. But yeah, I mean, a couple stories come to mind. I had someone who I was working with who had been unemployed for about 8 months before we started working together. And he was applying and just not getting any interviews, just total crickets. And this happens to so many of my clients. And then they start to feel like something's wrong with me. Like I can't get a job. Something's wrong with me. I've applied to 500 jobs and no one has even given me an interview. But the reality that I have to share is you could have applied to 500 jobs, but zero humans could have seen a single one of your applications. And that is just the truth of the job search right now, because you have to beat the bot and you have to beat the giant stack of applications that are coming in now that jobs are remote and people can apply all over the world. And so when I started working with this one specific client, I started pushing him instead of applying to 500 jobs online, let's just try and get 25 networking coffees over the next 2 months. See if you can do that. And he went from 500 applications, zero interviews, to 5 to 10 networking coffees over the course of the next month. And from there, ended up in 7 different interview processes, final interviews for multiple of them, landed a job, and has a higher paying, better job, more satisfaction than he's ever had before. And that's the kind of stuff that it's amazing. But when you're applying to 500 jobs with no momentum, it's terrible.
Oh,
It
it's
feels
awful.
horrible. You lose your confidence. But then when you can flip that, have a few conversations, and suddenly you're in tons of job interview processes, it's amazing. It's a huge confidence boost and it creates so many more opportunities.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've been in that process before. I've been in that downward spiral of why does no one want to hire me? So I get it. And I would say, the one thing that, we were talking about this a little bit before we came on is sometimes it seems like that ask of, hey, can we grab coffee? Can we grab a virtual coffee? That's a thing
Yep.
too. So if you want to connect with someone who's not in your community, that is absolutely a thing. And it really just takes the ask. And we say in our house, like, the answer
Mhm.
is always no if you don't ask. So if you don't ask,
Yep.
you're not even giving someone a chance to prove you wrong and say, yes, I'd love to chat with you. So give that, like, and it doesn't have to be an elaborate wedding invitation. You can send
Right.
someone an email, say, hey, Abby, I really love what you're doing. I followed you. I too want to get into engineering. Um,
Yeah,
can we chat about engineering? I would really love to learn more
totally.
about it. it doesn't have to be this massive ask. You don't have to put everything you want out of it in that email. It's a simple invite. And have you seen
Yep.
that as well on your end?
Absolutely. So I teach a like 5-step process of how to ask for a coffee chat and then what to do when you actually get there and then how to follow up. And I find that even that can be helpful just to give people like an email template of, hey, this is normal. You can send this email. It could work for you. I promise. But then I think the other side of the coin, and we were talking about this, Amy, before this call too, is the teaching people who to network with. So, there's the misconception a lot of times that networking is going to this random event, grabbing some business cards and checking the box. Amy, you talk about this all the time. But the reality is your network is actually just your community. And so I teach people the three concentric circles of who you can network with. And the rest of the world, the random networking events are actually on the outside of those circles. And it's going to be the least impactful networking. But I think sometimes we mix up what networking actually is, we overcomplicate it, and when it's so complicated and scary, then suddenly people don't want to do it. They're afraid to do it. It becomes unmanageable.
Right. It becomes this, how do I even start? Looking up
Mhm.
Chamber of Commerce and other events, and how do I even start networking? And no, it's the people you
Mhm.
know who are the people that you hang out with all the time or the people that you see all the
Totally.
time. And so it's not as scary. It's not as big of a leap. It's
Mhm.
communicating some different things, what you want. And I always say too, I think it's challenging that and you probably talk about this in your 5-step process, that people know you as Abby, my friend, maybe not necessarily as, the accountant or whatever that job role you
Right.
might be you might be looking for. So you do have to sometimes give that little bit of an insight into what you do, what you're successful at, what you really want to get into. Give people those nuggets so they can help make that happen for you too.
Yeah. No, that's definitely it. And I think that's where going in with a pitch and with an understanding of why you're talking to this person, back to the element of career design, like what you actually want to do with your life. Like it's one thing to just show up and have coffee with someone. It's great. You want to ask lots of questions, right? But you also need to be able to say, by the way, this is what I'm looking to do. Because that's how people can actually start helping you versus I'm just grabbing lunch with my old friend and you never talk about your skill set or what you're looking for or the fact that you're interested in working with their company or their friend or whatever. So you do have to have a clear pitch, an understanding of why you're talking to them, and you have to be willing to make an ask or have a sort of call to action at the end.
Absolutely. I want to kind of shift us just a little bit. I want to talk about resumes because I think this
Yes.
is something that is so different for everybody. And you hear all these different things. Like, how do you make a resume stand out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually tell my clients when we're working through the resume to just go on Google, type resume, and then scroll for a while and imagine that that's what your recruiter or hiring manager's inbox looks like. So when we talk about building a resume that stands out, like imagine 250 applications. Go on Google and see how long it takes to get to 250 resumes just on the thumbnails. Because the massive amount of like resumes and data that hiring managers have to screen is unbelievable. So, how do you make your resume stand out? My first recommendation is have a human being refer you, recommend you, say your name to the hiring manager so that the hiring manager can actually be looking for your resume. That's the best way to make it stand out is have someone go looking for it. If that is not possible or you've tried and it just didn't happen, you still want to have a really good resume, my top tips would be first of all, it has to appeal to both a robot and a human because we know that your resume gets into the pile and it's immediately screened by the applicant tracking system, which means that the format has to appeal to a computer. So anything with columns and boxes and crazy fonts, that might be really impressive to a human being, but a robot hates it because it doesn't know where to find your information. So you have to have a standard resume template that looks like everybody else's, that's what applicant tracking systems are looking for. On the other hand, when you scroll through the Google thumbnails and you realize 250 resumes is crazy, I always say it's worth paying attention to like what stands out to you when you're going through that exercise, because it's probably going to be a large font, good white space, pops of color. Canva actually did a study with like 55,000 recruiters that they launched in early January. And all of these recruiters said they wanted to see color and creativity, which is great, but the robot doesn't want to see creativity. So I always say use the template that's going to pass the robot screening, add a pop of color and lots of white space for the human eye. That would be step one. And then the second thing is your resume doesn't want to read like a job description. And this is not just for job seekers. This is like advice for professionals in the LinkedIn world. You don't want your resume to read like, I was hired to lead a team. I was hired to be responsible for this budget. You want it to read like, this is what I accomplished when I was in this role. So having quantified impact statements using numbers is very important. So from my own experience, I could say I was hired to open an incubator in Oklahoma, or I could say I opened the largest incubator in Oklahoma and filled it to capacity within 6 months, beating the industry average by 2.5 years. Tells you so much more about what I did. Or I managed vendor relationships versus I managed 80 different vendors and cut the cost by 50% per month. Suddenly you can see the impact of the work that you've done. So you want your resume not just to speak to what you were responsible for, but actually what are the accomplishments that you had in each role to prove to me that you're someone who can meet KPIs, quantify the impact, and understand that your work should drive metrics. So
That is fantastic.
those are my advice pieces.
That is fantastic. And how do you suggest, I'm just trying to think of like if this was me, how do you get there? Like let's say my resume is the check the box. It's not the accomplishments, it's the job requirements. How do you
Yep.
shift your mind and how do you shift that from that one to the accomplishment version?
Yeah. So I have a whole like PDF that teaches you how to do this. But what I would recommend is think about what you're being measured by your boss for doing. Like, what are you responsible for in your company? What are you doing that moves the needle forward? So you should know that already, right? You should know what your KPIs are or what you're being measured against. And then think about what are the key accomplishments that I did in this role? Because the truth is, if your title is director of operations or VP of marketing, I can probably assume what your job description is. So your resume doesn't need to tell me your job description. But what your resume can tell me is what did you accomplish that was uniquely yours? And you want to fill your resume with those bullet points instead, because that's just so much more interesting and it makes you seem so much more professional, elevated, data driven, detail oriented. It's a huge asset in a pool of hundreds of resumes. The ones with the numbers are memorable and they stand out.
I think that's really, really great advice. And I know that you have an interview ebook that is available for free. So I'll make sure to send that out in the follow-up email after this. So everyone can sign up for that so they can get a chance to really indulge in your gloriousness and continue to add to their capacity and their skills. I want to ask you one quick question because to wrap us up before we go into question and answer, I'm a big fan of negotiating for getting paid for what you're worth. And I know that's something that
Totally.
women especially are not so great at, but I also know that that's not just a specific women's issue. So talk to
Mm-hmm.
me about negotiating a salary and negotiating, if it's not a salary, what else you might want to add in if the salary seems satisfactory? Do you always have to negotiate? How would you
Yep.
give me a little 101 on negotiation?
Yeah, well, I love talking about negotiation. It was my favorite MBA class that I took, and it's just been something that I love helping my friends and my clients do. There are 14, there's really more than 14, but there are at least 14 things you can negotiate in a job offer. It can be title, start date, work life balance, like flexibility. Is it part time remote? Is it full time in person? You can negotiate PTO. You can negotiate potentially things like 401k matching or other types of benefits. You can also negotiate salary, bonuses, other compensation packages. So you should always negotiate. If the salary is amazing, then that's great. You could negotiate something else, but you have to be prepared to talk about the salary conversation really in your first interview with a company, because what you say in an interview can and will be held against you. So if you say in a job interview, I want to be making X dollars per year, let's say you say 90,000 to 110,000 in your very first interview. Then you progress and you learn that the salary offering is actually 110 to 130,000. You could still get offered 90,000 because that is what you asked for. So, when you're thinking about a salary negotiation, it starts on day 1 and you want to be sure that you've done your research. What is expected to be paid from this company? What do other people make? Is this a nonprofit or a for profit? What city is it in? All of these things go into your expectation for what the salary will be. You want to be prepared for that so that you can say a number or not say a number. I have a whole newsletter that I've written about this topic, but one of the best responses you have if a recruiter asks you what salary do you want to be making is, can you tell me the approved range for this position? And if they keep pushing, you can say things like, I'm interviewing at the high end of the range posted on the job description, things like that. The negotiation really doesn't happen until you have an offer in hand, but you have to be prepared to talk about it from the very first stage of interviewing with a company.
I love that line. Like, I'm interviewing at the higher edge of the range. I think that's a great line of how to work kind of, I don't want to say work around it, but declare
Yep.
where you're at. That's a really great point. I want to point out that we will do in my follow-up email I'll put for Abby's newsletter, which is always full with so much information, the ebook, obviously, because she has so much to share. I want to make sure I give us some time for questions and answers. So thank you, Abby, for sharing with us. If you have a
Yes.
question, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. If not, I have a couple we can fill in for Abby as well. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that chat. I'm going to go on and ask you a couple more if that's okay. If I see one pop in the chat, I'll put that in there as well. What does it take? You've talked a little bit about the negotiation begins in the interview. How do you leave a lasting impression?
Yeah, in an interview. So, one of my favorite pieces of advice for candidates, and again, all of this is in the interview ebook. I interviewed 20 people from my network who have all conducted at least 100, if not 5,000 interviews themselves. And I wanted to make sure that we all agreed on what best practices are in a job interview. And the good news is we did, because there are patterns to what makes a really good interview. There's so much information about this in the ebook. I'm not going to be able to get through it all, but just a couple of my top pointers. One is, make sure you know what job and what company you're interviewing for. It's amazing how often people come into a job interview and just honestly, you ask them a question, why do you want this job? Or what do you bring to this job? And their answer is so out of left field that it starts to seem like they don't even know what job they're interviewing for. So be prepared is my one piece of advice. Have a great elevator pitch. Be prepared to introduce yourself at the beginning. That is the most frequently messed up question in an interview. People over prepare for questions like, why are you leaving your current job? What are your weaknesses? And they forget the very first impression is going to be, tell me about yourself. So be prepared for that one.
Yes.
And then the other thing I would say is ask really good questions at the end. A, that makes a good impression, but B, that's also your chance to interview the interviewer back. And interviews should feel like conversations, not confrontations. And so you want to make sure that you are participating in the conversation, asking your own questions, and that it really is a two-way street.
I think that's great. I can tell you that how many people don't even bother researching, like, just Google the company, look it up,
Yep.
read their
Yep.
about us, so you're kind of familiar. And how much that makes a difference in the questions you're asking. You're right, the follow-up questions. I think there's such a key piece of just coming up. You don't have to be prepared with a 10-page document, but being
Right.
prepared to answer the questions and also knowing yourself and knowing what your skill sets are and really making notes of
Totally.
that for that elevator pitch. I think that's a huge thing. I love to ask people, "What's your story?" Because I kind of
Yep.
get whatever that is, but I also love to say, "Hey, this job interview is as much about me and our team liking you as it is about you liking me. Like I understand this is a
Yep.
two-way street." And so if that takes some pressure
Totally.
off, I think that is like, remember, this is a two-way street that you have to like them too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, I have a great question from Amanda. How can you always be networking to ensure that you have connections in case you need to start job hunting all of a sudden?
Yeah, that's a great question. This happens. We are in a world where layoffs are more common than they used to be. And so you really never know when you're going to need options. I think networking gets a bad rap for, I mean, we talked about this already, but being this like hard thing. The reality is some of your best network connections could be your coworker or a client that you work with or your former boss or like your best friend's dad, right? So part of always be networking is remember that the way you show up in your day-to-day career is making an impression on the people around you. And part of your network comes from just being really good at your job and being professional and building relationships in your current role. The other side of that is say yes to things. So if someone asks you to come to an event with them, say yes. If you meet someone at that event and they ask you for coffee, say yes. Be the type of person who is open to opportunities and new relationships. You can still go to events and build relationships at these events, right? That doesn't mean that you can't also network at events, but just remember that the way you show up every single day is creating a reputation and an impression that informs people whether or not they want to be a part of your network.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would second that, and I would say that I love the saying yes. I would also say that, those opportunities to catch up with someone once a week over a coffee or a lunch, it doesn't always have
Mm-hmm.
to if you're not job hunting, you don't have to have an agenda. It's creating
Yep.
those relationships, and then my big thing, and I know you mentioned this earlier, is follow-up. So when I'm at
Yeah.
that coffee with said person and we talk about I don't care if it's a news article, I don't care if it's a TikTok video, I don't care what it is, follow up in that email and say, and if you have nothing to follow up on, you just reply and say, "Hey, thanks for coffee today. It was really nice to catch up. Let's do it again soon." It's just that key
Totally.
piece, keeping that, cultivating that relationship. And then when you can follow up, and if you follow up every day in your career, people are going to see that because people don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're that
Yep.
person who, like you said, walks into a meeting and all of a sudden you're the one who's a key person that people can rely on, they see that. Your coworkers, your
Totally.
colleagues, like, once again, don't be afraid to go to lunch with your colleagues because once again, it's a spotted network or clients. That's a key piece of
Totally.
that, maintaining that network. And so I think those are all really, really great points. Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to thank Abby. Go ahead. Do you have anything else? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say one more thing. I think sometimes too we get this urge of like we see an article or we have a conversation and it makes us think about somebody. And we like get this urge, but then maybe we talk ourselves out of it of like, I don't need to like reach out to that person or I'm not gonna bother them with that article. But those are the extra steps that actually keeps your network warm. So if you're out on the street and like a song plays and it makes you think of someone, just text them and be like, "Hey, heard this song, made me think of you." Like that is networking. That is keeping your network warm too.
That's exactly. I just did that the other day to someone I had just thought of, but I haven't talked to in 8 months. And I was like, "Hey, are you alive? Like, I'm just checking in on you." And
Right.
so
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be mind blowing. Like we said, it doesn't have to be some sort of elaborate scroll of an invitation. Hey, I was
Right.
thinking about you. I heard this. I know your kid likes Paw Patrol. Here's this thing I saw they're coming to your city. Whatever that might
Yep.
be is once again how to keep that warm. I think that's a great way to say that.
Yeah. Yep. Totally.
I love it. Well, I am so excited that we had Abby here today. Thank you, Abby, for being here. I'm going to pop up her info in theory. There we go on the screen. So you have that as well. But I'll also put everything in the follow up. So please make sure that we have your email if you've joined us from a different platform, from LinkedIn or wherever else you might have found us. Make sure to send me a DM somewhere along the line. Here's my email as well. Send me an email and I'll make sure that you get that follow up. So you have everything you need to check in with Abby. She's very active on Instagram. So I know if you want, make sure you go over and follow her on there. I know she's really good at checking her DMs. So not that I'm advising you I'll DM her at once, but if you do, she'll probably find you
Or
somewhere
do
along the
it.
line. Or do
Yeah,
it,
or
or do it all at
respond.
once. Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing Abby continue to soar. Thanks, Abby, for all your wisdom.
Thank you, Amy. This has been great. Thank you everyone for being here.